Okay, this video is a movie review of this movie here, Billy Graham, An Extraordinary Journey. Billy Graham was a Protestant preacher. Actually, he was from the Baptist congregation. And by the way, I don't care too much difference between one different group of Christians or another. You know, it's the basic story is the same for all of them. But it's a rather extraordinary movie about his life. He was a great man. And this crowd right here on the front page, this is typical of Billy Graham. Typical to be preaching to an entire jam-packed stadium. Okay, he grew up as a young guy on a dairy farm. So with his parents, his brother, and he worked, did a lot of labor as a young guy on a dairy farm. There he's a young guy, and he wasn't that religious growing up when he was real young. Okay, here we go. Got to get these slides work. Then he went to the Florida Bible Institute, and he liked the religious stuff, and he had a talent for it. And the more time went by, the more he was sort of pulled into the ministry. He also went to Wheaton College in Illinois, and then he was an extraordinarily good preacher. And this is him as a young guy. He's also a good-looking guy. I'm sure that helped. But man, did he have a talent and a passion for preaching. And the crowds just couldn't get enough of him. Here he is preaching in a tent revival, and he went from one place to another. And here he was in this organization called Youth for Christ. And he was just very good at it, very popular, very sincere. And his sermons are great. I've listened to his sermons. They're great. This is one of these tent revivals. He married a lady named Ruth. Ruth Graham, her name was Ruth Bell originally, and they had 5 children together. And they were very, very devoted to each other all of their lives. Billy Graham lived a long time. He was born in 1918, and he lived till 2018, so just about 100 years. And the whole family is very close and devoted to each other. It's an impressive story. Here he is in 1957. This is in New York City in Times Square. Look at this. Block after block of packed people here to listen to Billy Graham. And it reminds you, too, like you heard, if you saw my previous video on Father Patrick Payton, and now you see Billy Graham, he would have like these revival events where he would speak to a football stadium packed full of people every day, week after week after week. And so, the modern church is all screwed up. The Catholic Church is pathetically screwed up. The Pope has been taken over by bad people. The current Pope stinks. The current priests pretty much stink. He used to have big families, so it wasn't a big deal to send one kid to the priesthood. Nowadays, because people have small families, they don't want to send a kid to the priesthood. So it's very hard for the priesthood to recruit good people. Plus, the Catholic Church, its administrative component is kind of corrupt all the way up. So it's hard for it to run well at the lower levels. But what I'm trying to say is when you see the true Christianity, when it's also this not-for-profit stuff is like intellectual castration of the church. I think it's a terrible thing. You go back to the pastors at the time of the Founding Fathers. They were great and they were very opinionated, versus the modern priests and sermons tend to be wimpy because of this not-for-profit status. They can't talk freely about a wide variety of things. So what I'm trying to tell you is when it's let out of the box and it can speak freely, Christianity actually becomes a very powerful thing. And here's a quote from Charles Spurgeon, an old preacher from the 1800s. The gospel is like a caged lion. It does not need to be defended. It just needs to be let out of its cage, and it will defend itself. And that's what I'm saying. When you see a person who just goes ahead and speaks from the heart, it's so powerful. It's amazing. They sometimes you'd be there for months, day after day, just packed auditoriums, okay? Oh, by the way, this is the hot thing going on right now. This is what everyone is talking about. This movie right here. So you might want to look into this. This is really a big hot topic right now. Okay, getting back to Billy Graham. Billy Graham was a very fearless guy. He went everywhere. He went to Vietnam, and he went to pretty much every place you'd be scared to go. He went there. He went to North Korea. He went to all the Eastern European countries that were under communist control. Sorry, I'm having a hard time moving this picture. He went to Soviet Russia. He went to, you name it, he went there. And he was, everybody... He was friends with just about everybody, Billy Graham. He was friends here with John F. Kennedy, the Irish president of the United States. He was friends with Martin Luther King. He was, actually all the presidents also at one time or another invited Billy Graham over to chat with him. Here is Johnny Carson. He's on the Johnny Carson Show. He was on the cover of Time Magazine, Life Magazine, Newsweek. So what I'm trying to say is America was much, much, much more overtly Christian than it is now. Nowadays, I think it's still very Christian, but a lot of it is quiet Christians who, sort of keep to themselves or don't know that much about the church. It's not as passionate and open a thing as it used to be. He went to all of these countries that were behind the Iron Curtain and communism back in the the 1960s and 70s, and he risked his lives many times to do that. He felt he was on a mission, and that's what he's going to do. Here he is in Soviet Russia, speaking to all the religious leaders, and he spoke very openly about Christ and Christianity. Another thing very typical. So this is a typical thing for Billy Graham, speaking at a packed football stadium or baseball stadium, whatever it is. And then the people would be in the stands initially, and then he would call the ones that hadn't made up their mind yet to convert to Christianity. And many, many of them would convert. Pretty routine. Hundreds of them, even over 1,000, would convert at a time to Christianity after listening to Billy Graham speak. He converted millions of people to Christianity that weren't Christian until they heard him speak. Here's another just typical scenario. He'd be giving a speech in some packed stadium, and then he'd make a call to the altar who wants to convert to Christ and Christianity. And lots of people would come up to that altar. That was a pretty routine event and here's the same thing, packed football stadium, all the people, he makes a call to the altar, they all come convert to Christianity. When you learn about Christianity, it's such a great thing. Once you actually have a little bit more of an understanding of it, it's amazing. Also, of course, Ronald Reagan loved him, another Irish American president. Here he is. He went to Moscow. So this is when Reagan was calling, in 1989, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And the Russian wall came down, between Berlin and Russia. The other thing that happened, and a lot of people don't realize it, but there's different theories about the so-called fall of communism in Russia. What other people say is, it's bogus, okay? The Russian communism, yes, they gave up their satellite countries like, Poland, East Berlin, and Hungary, and a few other places, Yugoslavia and whatnot. But what they say is that Russia never really gave up communism. That in a sense, by letting the Berlin Wall come down and giving up the satellite countries, what they were in a sense doing was they were putting the West to sleep. Because what had also kind of propped up Christianity in the West, especially the United States up until this time, was this idea of, we are the ones that stand up for freedom and goodness in the world, and that Soviet Union was the evil, godless communism. Everything I heard when I was young was, in God we trust, we pledge allegiance, one nation under God, that we are, the Christian country that is good and honest and true and free, and that Russia was, a lousy communist crap hole. Same thing with China, etc. Okay, that was the mentality around when I was a young guy growing up. And what I'm saying is, when the Berlin Wall came down, the so-called collapse of communism, there was a sense that, everything is okay now. We no longer have this evil empire. Reagan used to call Russia the evil empire. So we no longer have the evil empire to contend with, and everything is okay now. And that was said by some people to have put the West to sleep. And once the West thought that it no longer had this great godless evil empire to compete with, that everything was okay, and that Christianity started to decline, and the United States became much more decadent and sinful and irreligious and immoral, and sort of lapsed downward and downward. And I actually think that's true, because when I was a kid, you turn on the TV, there would be all these heroic men. All right, nowadays you turn on the TV and you just see this pathetic, disgusting, decadent culture. I haven't gone to a Hollywood movie in over 20 years because they all stink. They're just a bunch of action flicks with no story, no meaning, just special effects, made for low IQ retards. For people who can't speak English, also, it's just they're just worthless. Versus the good old movies. There was tons of great old movies when I was a young guy. There were great comedies. I loved all the Animal House and Stripes and Caddyshack and all that stuff. Well, anyways, getting back to Billy Graham here. He died. He's buried right next to his wife. He preached Christianity to probably more people than anyone who ever lived, many, many millions and millions of persons. And he's a great preacher, had a great life. And that video, there's also there's a documentary of him that's about an hour and 12 minutes. And then there's a sermon of his about a little bit over 30 minutes long. And then there's a whole bunch of other, extra features about lives and interviewing of his friends and the people who knew him and stuff. So he's a great man. He lived a great life. And it kind of shows you some of the power of Christianity and the way that, it doesn't change. It's pretty basic stuff. The Bible doesn't change. This is not the time to get into all the Bible stuff, but anyways, I thought that was a good example for you. And this is it's a DVD. The Extraordinary Journey of Billy Graham. It's well worth listening to. I really enjoyed it, and it inspires you. It gives you hope. So, anyways, I hope that was interesting for you.